Now we begin to discuss actual English immigration from England to the New World. And if you look at the title of the slide, you see something referred to as push and pull factors. And these factors refer to those factors that shape or influence immigration from one place to another. Okay. And I'm about to define it right now, but I will say this. You could almost think of this literally, right? What are those factors that are pushing immigrants out or pulling them in, right? All right, so a push factor, as you probably can guess now, are those factors located in the migrant's place of origin that shape uh, immigration, right? And that's opposed to pull factors. Pull factors are those factors found in the migrant's place of settlement, all right? Those factors found, in this case, in the New World, that basically shape the migrant's decision. To be specific, the English person's decision to move from England to the New World. And I should note this, it's important to use this framework of immigration whenever we think about immigration in general, because it applies to even today's contemporary immigration. Obviously, that should be the case, right? For example, when we think about immigration from parts of Latin America to the United States, or we talk about, in the case of Syria, for example, they're embroiled in a civil war, and you see a lot of refugees fleeing Syria, right, and going to parts of Europe, for example. We could employ this push and pull framework to analyze it. And moreover, let me say this, that, it's important to use or to think in both push and pull factors. Okay, don't just think from, say, the perspective of pull factors, like, coming here for jobs or uh, upward mobility. It's important to think about both in order to have a more well-rounded understanding of immigration in general. Okay, so those are push factors and pull factors. Let's apply it to the English case. So let's begin with push factors. And I think I've already alluded to this phenomenon, what's happening in not just England, but many parts of Europe at the time. This is something we're going to discuss very soon when we talk specifically about the Puritan settlement in New England. But for now, I just want to bring your attention to the fact that since the early 1500s in Europe, there was this movement called Reformation. Some of you may have heard of that. And in basic terms, Reformation refers to the splinter that happens in the Christian world. Before Reformation, if I refer to something as Christian, or Christianity, it basically means Catholicism, right? Because it was monolithic. Christianity was just under this single umbrella of Catholicism. But of course, through the centuries, you see dissent and even criticism emanating from some Christians or Catholics criticizing the Catholic Church for various reasons. And like I said, I'll get into the more specific nature of these criticisms in a future lecture. But for now, um, let's recognize that because of this building up of criticism, mounting criticism, we see the splinter happening in the early 1500s. And then you see Christianity divided into the Catholic Church and Protestantism. Okay. And perhaps you know this already, but even under the umbrella of Protestantism, there's various denominations like, Puritans, Lutherans, Quakers, Baptists, and what have you, right? But they're all Protestants. Okay, so because of this splinter that happens, there's a lot of religious hostility between the different, denominations. Of course, between Catholics and Protestants, but even among Protestants themselves. For example, Anglicans are in conflict with Puritans in England. All right. And I should mention this right off the bat. The Anglican Church, also called the Church of England, was the official state religion. This was established by Henry VIII. You may have heard of this story when he was refused a divorce from one of his wives. He had multiple wives, right? But the Pope refused it because, Roman Catholicism frowns upon divorce. Of course, there's also the political dimension involved with the Pope. Well, being the monarch, right, the powerful monarch, Henry VIII decides to create his own form of Christianity, and that becomes, quote, the Church of England, right? Also known as Anglicanism. It's still around today in England, the Anglican Church. And, that's the official state religion because the monarch established it, right? So the Church of England is in conflict with Puritans, and Puritans become one example of several, right? Several Protestant denominations that were persecuted in their home country of England. So they decide to leave. Okay, so that's the push factor. Pushing them out of England is, persecution, oppression. You may have heard of Bloody Mary. Well, Mary was an actual queen at the time, and when she gained ascendancy to the English throne, she was a devout Catholic, and therefore she felt that she needed to persecute Protestants. And by the way, this is happening in the 1500s. As I mentioned, it's a time of turmoil domestically in England. So she basically earns the nickname Bloody Mary, right? I don't know if I talked about that earlier, but I'm just sort of underlying the degree to which there's religious conflict and hostility. So, in order to escape this ecclesiastical conflict and hostility, you see various groups like the Puritans and the Quakers and so forth leaving England. Okay, so that's a push factor. Let me skip B for now because it's quite complex. It probably deserves its own slide, which I'll do. But let me skip to C, and that's commercialism. Now, despite the primacy of A in terms of it being a push factor, we can't discount the primary role of commercialism. Okay, it was a primary role, or served a primary role in English migration. So obviously, this has nothing to do with religion, commercialism, right? We're talking about business, um, entrepreneurship, trying to make profit. So earlier, I talked about this business institution called the Chartered Company. And I believe I talked about this when I was discussing the Dutch role in immigration and settlement, and in particular, the Manhattan Island incident, right? Well, basically, a joint stock company is the English version of that chartered company. And let me remind you again what's happening there. You have these various investors putting their money together to subsidize the exploration, settlement, colonization, and ultimately the gaining of profit in the new world. So it's a business venture. Okay, it's a entrepreneurial enterprise. So you have joint stock companies. You may have heard of the Virginia Company. Well, the Virginia Company is a joint stock company that's establishing a presence now, an English presence in Virginia. And in fact, Jamestown will be founded by the Virginia Company. Okay, now think about New England and Puritans, right? I just mentioned that, yes, they were pushed out of England due to religious persecution. Yet at the same time, and this deserves some discussion before I talked about commercialism of Puritans, When they were still in England, Puritans tended to be business oriented, commercial minded. So, this meant that at that time, they weren't the poor peasants, out in the rural areas. Actually, many of them were located in the urban areas. They established businesses and they were commercially successful for the most part compared to other groups. So their term back then was well heeled. Okay, well heeled, meaning that you're wealthy, right? Or above average in wealth. And by the way, it costs money to go to the New World. Once things stabilize in the New World after this rocky period, unstable period, right? It costs money if you wanted to go from England to the New World. You couldn't just go on a whim. If you're a person of ordinary means, you had to save for years just to take a chance to go to the New World. And even then, you know, um, survival was not guaranteed. There's always the possibility of Indians, right, invading your settlement. So there's Indian conflict, not to mention unknown land, right? Excuse me, uh, what's the word? Uncharted territory, right? Terra incognita, to use the Latin term. Okay, so yeah, Puritans were business oriented. And when we see the example of New England settlement by the Puritans, we see immediately the presence of something called the Massachusetts Bay Company. Okay, sometimes I've seen it just called the Massachusetts Company. But what's going on here, it indicates to us something that's important here. Namely, that commercialism and culture, to be more specific, religion, are coexisting, right, side by side as a push factor, okay, in English immigration, with the Puritan case, to be specific, in New England. Okay, now I mentioned Virginia earlier. It's not as sort of it's not spurred by religion the same way it is in Massachusetts. Okay, it's really about commerce there. But nonetheless, my whole point here is that when it comes to push and pull, or excuse me, push factors in this case, when you think about A and B, they're not mutually exclusive. Okay, so I want to emphasize how important commercialism is here. All right, so I'm going to discuss B with a separate video, so that'll come next.